Before the first breath, before the first name, there was awareness. This is not a story about death. It is an investigation into what refuses to die. From ancient Egypt to modern intensive care units, from buried papyrus to clinical data, you are about to cross a threshold. This is the riddle of death.
Before the first breath, a door older than fear. Long before humanity learned how to write equations, it learned how to bury its dead. This simple fact unsettles modern certainty. Civilizations rose and fell, technologies vanished, languages dissolved into dust. Yet the question of death remained intact, untouched by progress. The earliest graves were not acts of disposal, but of preparation. Bodies were arranged, objects were placed beside them, directions were chosen with intention. Even in prehistory, death was treated as not an accident, but as a journey. Science today prefers cleaner language. It speaks of cardiac arrest, cerebral hypoxia, systemic failure. These terms are accurate, precise, and deeply insufficient. They describe how the body stops, but never what stops. For something does stop, something withdraws. We call it consciousness because we lack a better word. Consciousness is the only phenomenon that observes the universe while being part of it. It is not visible under a microscope, not weighable on a scale, not locatable in a single region of the brain, and yet it is the only thing we are certain we possess. When death occurs, the universe does not lose mass. Energy is conserved, atoms remain, but experience vanishes. The inner witness, the silent narrator of reality, falls quiet. Or does it? This book is not an attempt to comfort, nor is it an attempt to preach belief. It is an inquiry, scientific, philosophical, and ancient, into the most guarded threshold of existence, a threshold civilizations tried to map long before science dared to name. Ancient Egypt approached death with an audacity modern culture finds disturbing. The Egyptians did not hide death behind hospital curtains. They carved it on stone. They painted it on walls. They organized their entire civilization around the assumption that death was not an end, but a transformation governed by laws as real as gravity. To them, dying was not chaos, it was procedure. Modern science, unexpectedly, has begun to echo this intuition. Near-death research documents structured experiences at the edge of clinical death. Neuroscience reveals patterned activity in the dying brain rather than random collapse. Physics questions whether information, once created, can ever truly disappear. Each discipline approaches the same abyss from a different angle, and each hesitates at the same point. Because crossing that threshold would require admitting that reality may not be exhausted by what we can measure. The Egyptology approach adopted in this book is neither nostalgia nor mysticism. It is a methodological lens, one that treats ancient symbolic systems as early models of consciousness, not as superstition. Symbols were the mathematics of civilizations that lacked formal equations. Myths were hypotheses encoded in narrative form. Rituals were experiments repeated across generations. The Egyptian journey of the soul, through death, judgment, and transfiguration, was not a story told to children. It was a theory of mind, morality, and cosmic order expressed through architecture, language, and ritual. This book will move between laboratory data and funerary texts, between MRI scans and pyramid inscriptions, between neurons and stars. Not to blur the line between science and myth, but to reveal that both may be tracing the same structure from opposite ends. If consciousness is fundamental, then death is not its destruction, but its rearrangement. If consciousness is emergent, then death should erase it completely. Both positions carry consequences far greater than theology. They redefine identity, ethics, fear, and meaning itself. This introduction stands at the edge of that inquiry. The chapters that follow do not offer answers, they offer alignment between what ancient civilizations sensed and what modern science is beginning to suspect. And now, having acknowledged the door, we proceed to stand before it. Part 1. When the heart stops asking. Chapter 1. The Threshold of Silence. There is a precise moment, measured in milliseconds, when the human heart ceases its rhythmic obedience to life. Electrodes flatten, oxygen debt accumulates, neurons begin a countdown written in chemistry. To medicine, this moment is definable. To physics, it is describable. To paperwork, it is final. Yet to consciousness, it is anything but clear. Death does not arrive as a thunderclap. It slips in quietly, like a librarian closing the last book in an abandoned hall. And at that threshold, where biology ends and meaning begins, science hesitates, not because it lacks instruments, but because its instruments were never designed to measure absence. Modern medicine can prolong the beating of the heart, it can oxygenate blood, it can replace failing organs, but when awareness itself withdraws, when the observer disappears, no machine can testify to what happens next. This is the paradox that has haunted laboratories as much as temples. In ancient Egypt, this paradox was not feared, it was studied. The Egyptians did not ask, "What happens when we die?" They asked, "How do we continue?" To them, death was not a collapse of existence, but a reconfiguration of it, an administrative transition overseen by cosmic law. They dissected the human being into components: the hat, body; the ka, vital force; the ba, personality; the ib, heart; the ren, name; and the ak, transfigured spirit. Each part had a destiny, none were disposable. This was not mythology in the modern dismissive sense. It was an early model of consciousness theory, encoded in ritual rather than equations. Today, neuroscience offers a different language, but circles the same mystery. When the brain is deprived of oxygen, electrical storms erupt across the cortex. Gamma waves spike, memory centers activate. Patients revived from clinical death report vivid experiences: tunnels, lights, panoramic life reviews, encounters with deceased relatives. These reports appear across cultures, ages, and belief systems. Skeptics attribute them to hypoxia, neurotransmitter floods, or temporal lobe seizures. Believers see evidence of an afterlife. But both camps overlook a deeper question. Why does the dying brain produce meaning instead of chaos? If consciousness were merely a byproduct of neurons firing, death should dissolve experience into noise. Yet again and again, the threshold produces structure, stories, symbols, judgment, passage. The ancient Egyptians would have smiled at this debate. They believed the heart, not the brain, was the seat of consciousness. During mummification, the brain was discarded through the nose. The heart was preserved with reverence. In the Hall of Two Truths, the heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat, cosmic order. If it was heavier, burdened by imbalance, the soul would be devoured by Ammit. If lighter, it would pass on. Strip away the imagery, and a startling idea remains. Consciousness is evaluated, not measured in volts or synapses, but in coherence. Modern physics, strangely, is inching towards similar metaphors. Information theory suggests that information is never destroyed, only transformed. Quantum mechanics allows for non-local effects, entanglement beyond space and time. If consciousness is a form of information, structured, integrated, self-referential, then death may not annihilate it. It may decohere it into another state. This is not mysticism, it is an unresolved hypothesis. Consider the integrated information theory of consciousness, which proposes that awareness arises from the degree to which a system integrates information. According to this model, consciousness is not binary. It exists on a spectrum. If so, then the question is not whether consciousness survives death, but what happens to integrated information when its biological substrate collapses. Does it dissipate like heat, or does it reorganize like matter after an explosion? The ancient Egyptians built pyramids not as tombs, but as machines of transition. Their geometry encoded stellar alignments, their chambers resonated at specific frequencies, their texts, the pyramid texts, coffin texts, and Book of the Dead, were not prayers, but instructions. Words to be spoken, they called them. Spoken to whom? To the dead, or to consciousness itself? In this light, death becomes less an ending and more a protocol, a sequence, a law governed by laws we have not yet deciphered. Science, for all its brilliance, remains trapped on one side of the threshold, recording the silence after the question disappears. But the silence may not be empty. It may be listening. And the first step to understanding death is to admit that it is not merely a biological failure, but a frontier where physics, consciousness, and ancient memory converge. Part 2. The Duat, Cartography of the Invisible. To the modern mind, the afterlife is a fog, vague, abstract, undefined. To the ancient Egyptian, it was a territory. They called it the Duat, not heaven, not hell, but an intermediate realm, part cosmic corridor, part courtroom, part transformation chamber. A geography invisible to the living, yet meticulously mapped in texts, carvings, and ritual sequences. Walls of tombs were not decorated for beauty, they were instruction manuals engraved in stone. The Duat was dangerous, not because it was evil, but because it was lawful. Every gate had a guardian, every guardian had a name, every name had to be spoken correctly. Knowledge, not belief, was the currency of survival. This obsession with names is telling. In Egyptian metaphysics, to know the true name of something was to possess power over it. The soul that entered the Duat ignorant was not punished, it was lost, erased by entropy of awareness. Identity, once unanchored, dissolved. Modern neuroscience stumbles upon an unsettling parallel. When patients suffer severe hypoxia, the first faculty to erode is not emotion, but identity. Names vanish. Temporal orientation collapses. The self fragments before sensation fades. Memory, especially autobiographical memory, acts as an anchor, keeping consciousness coherent under stress. The Egyptians encoded this insight mythologically. They preserved the Ren, the name, at all costs. To erase a name from inscriptions was a second death. Without a name, the soul could not navigate the Duat. Without narrative continuity, consciousness could not survive transition. At the center of the Duat stood the Hall of Two Truths. Here, the heart, the Ib, was weighed against the feather of Maat, the principle of cosmic balance. This was not a moral judgment in the modern sense, it was a test of coherence. A heart heavy with contradiction, fragmentation, and unresolved imbalance failed to integrate. Failure did not lead to eternal torment, it led to annihilation. The devourer, Ammit, was not a demon, but a function, entropy personified. The soul that could not maintain internal order was unmade. Strip the symbolism, and the structure remains disturbingly modern. Information theory suggests that systems unable to preserve internal coherence collapse into noise. Consciousness, if viewed as an integrated informational structure, would face the same risk when removed from its biological stabilizers. The Egyptians did not fear punishment, they feared disintegration. Osiris, the god of death, was not a ruler of darkness, he was a god of reassembly. Murdered, dismembered, scattered, then restored. His myth is not about resurrection, but about pattern reconstruction after catastrophic loss. In this sense, Osiris represents the earliest known metaphor for consciousness surviving systemic collapse. The soul that passed judgment did not escape reality, it entered a new mode of existence, the Uk, a luminous, effective being capable of interaction across realms. Light. Modern near-death accounts speak repeatedly of light, not metaphorical light, but structured, intelligent luminosity, a field rather than a figure. Coincidence is a lazy explanation. What we observe instead is convergence, different civilizations, different languages, different eras, describing the same threshold using the only symbols available to them. The duad was not imagined as eternal, it was transitional, a passage, and passages, by definition, are engineered. The pyramids themselves were not monuments to death, but devices aligned with stellar cycles, particularly Orion, the celestial counterpart of Osiris. Geometry, astronomy, acoustics all converged toward a single objective, stabilizing the soul during passage. Modern physics now debates whether consciousness may require specific boundary conditions to persist, whether structure, resonance, or information density plays a role in its continuity. The Egyptians assumed the answer was yes, and built accordingly. Death, to them, was not the end of experience, it was the moment experience was tested. And the duat was not myth, it was a map, drawn by a civilization that refused to believe consciousness was an accident. In the next part of this chapter, we will examine how modern clinical death mirrors this ancient cartography, and why the dying brain seems to follow routes traced thousands of years before neurons were named. Part 3. Clinical death, when the map activates. Clinical death is a term designed to sound final. In practice, it is anything but. It marks the cessation of measurable signs of life. No heartbeat, no spontaneous breathing, no detectable brain activity on surface instruments. And yet, within this window, sometimes lasting minutes, something continues. Something observes. Modern resuscitation medicine has unintentionally opened a laboratory inside death itself. Patients revived after cardiac arrest report experiences that defy the expected collapse of consciousness. These are not dreams. They are not hallucinations in the casual sense. They are structured, sequential, and remarkably consistent across demographics. The sequence is striking. First, separation. Individuals report perceiving their bodies from an external vantage point, often with accurate descriptions of medical procedures later verified by staff. This phenomenon challenges the assumption that perception requires an intact sensory cortex. Second, passage. A sense of movement through a corridor, tunnel, or transitional space. Not always visual, sometimes geometric, sometimes spatially intuitive, directional. Third, encounter, a presence, a field, or intelligences perceived as purposeful rather than anthropomorphic. Communication occurs without language, direct transfer of meaning. Fourth, review, a panoramic re-experiencing of one's life, not as memory playback, but as relational impact. Actions are felt from the perspective of others. Ethics becomes physics. Finally, boundary, a limit that cannot or should not be crossed. Return follows, often abruptly. The resemblance to the Egyptian post-mortem journey is difficult to dismiss. Separation mirrors the detachment of the ba from the kat. Passage mirrors the traversal of the duat with its corridors and gates. Encounter mirrors the audience with Osirian intelligences, non-human yet deeply familiar. Review mirrors the weighing of the heart, not by judgment imposed from without, but by internal resonance. Boundary mirrors the threshold between the duat and the field of reeds, a return or a continuation. Science offers partial explanations. Hypoxia can induce tunnel vision. Neurotransmitter surges, endorphins, serotonin, DMT, may alter perception. The temporal lobe, when stimulated, can evoke out-of-body sensations. Yet these explanations describe mechanisms, not meanings. They do not explain why dying consciousness organizes itself into narrative rather than noise. They do not explain why ethical salience intensifies rather than dissolve. They do not explain veridical perceptions, cases where patients report events occurring outside sensory range. One of the most unsettling findings in near-death research is the persistence of consciousness during flat EEG readings. Surface electroencephalograms measure cortical activity, not deeper brain structures, and certainly not whatever process may underlie awareness itself. Absence of signal is not evidence of absence. Recent studies in critical care units have documented surges of gamma activity moments after cardiac arrest, patterns associated with heightened awareness and information integration. In other words, the brain does not fade quietly. It rallies. This rally resembles a system attempting to preserve coherence under catastrophic failure. The Egyptian funerary texts anticipated this moment. They were meant to be spoken precisely when biological support collapsed, spoken to stabilize the soul, spoken to remind consciousness of its name, its order, its root. Modern patients receive no such instructions, and yet the map appears. This raises a disturbing possibility. The map is not learned, it is remembered. If consciousness carries intrinsic structures, templates for transition, then death may activate latent architectures rather than create new ones. Culture shapes interpretation, but not the underlying sequence. From this perspective, ancient Egypt did not invent the afterlife, it documented it. Clinical death, then, is not the end of awareness. It is the moment awareness loses its biological anchor and must navigate without familiar instruments. Those who return report a reluctance to come back, not from desire to escape life, but from recognition of a coherence absent in ordinary existence. Fear dissolves. Identity expands. Time loses authority. These are not fantasies of a dying brain grasping for comfort. They are signatures of transition. In the final movement of this chapter, we will confront the most uncomfortable implication of all and close the threshold we have opened. Part 4. The Return and the Weight of Knowing. There is a silence that follows return. Those who cross the threshold and come back rarely speak at first, not because the experience was terrifying, but because ordinary language collapses under its weight. Words, shaped for commerce and routine, are poorly suited to describe states where time dissolves and identity expands beyond the body. Yet, patterns emerge. Almost without exception, those who return report the same shock. Life resumes, but something essential has shifted. Fear of death diminishes or vanishes entirely. Material obsession loses its gravity. Ethical clarity sharpens, not as imposed rules, but as intuitive certainty. This transformation is not gradual. It is immediate. Clinicians call it after effects. Ancient Egypt would have called it initiation. In the Egyptian view, not all souls completed the journey. Some were sent back, not as punishment, but because their integration was incomplete. The soul that returned carried a residue of the duat, a memory of order beyond the physical. Modern near-death research documents the same phenomenon. Individuals return with heightened empathy, reduced aggression, and a deep intolerance for falsehood, especially self-deception. Many report difficulty reintegrating into social systems built on competition, fear, and artificial scarcity. They are not enlightened, they are dislocated. What they encountered was not paradise, but coherence. This raises the most disturbing implication of all. If consciousness encounters order beyond death, if actions are felt rather than judged, then morality is not cultural conditioning. It is a structural property of conscious systems. In other words, reality responds to coherence. The Egyptians understood this intuitively. Ma'at was not law imposed by gods, it was the operating system of the universe. To violate it was not sinful, it was destabilizing. The weighing of the heart was not a trial, it was a measurement. A heart burdened by fragmentation could not sustain itself beyond the body. A coherent heart transitioned naturally. Modern physics recognizes similar principles. Systems far from equilibrium collapse. Systems that maintain internal order persist. Life itself is a rebellion against entropy, temporary, localized, but real. Consciousness may be the highest expression of that rebellion. Death, then, is not its defeat, but its audit. This explains the return. Those sent back are not spared. They are tasked. They carry the unbearable knowledge that meaning is not optional and that every thought, intention, and action participates in a larger accounting. This is why many struggle. They have seen behind the curtain and found no tyrant, no judge, no reward system. Only law. Quiet, impersonal, precise. The ancient Egyptians did not fear death because they had already accepted this law. Their entire civilization was a rehearsal. Architecture, ritual, ethics, astronomy, all aligned to prepare consciousness for continuity. Modern civilization has done the opposite. It distracts, it anesthetizes, it pretends the threshold does not exist. And yet, every human being will face it, alone, without instruments, with nothing but the coherence they have cultivated. This chapter does not conclude with answers. It concludes with a warning. If consciousness is real, and if death is not its erasure, then the way we live is not forgotten. It is felt. The heart is weighed, not by gods, but by reality itself. The threshold closes here. What lies beyond will demand a deeper descent, and that descent begins in the next chapter.
What you heard was not a conclusion. It was a signal. The journey does not end here. In the next chapter, we go deeper, where science hesitates and ancient knowledge remembers. Until then, stay awake.